in facing the complexity of healthcare. Another two important premises are that there is a need to consider the variability of human population, and there is a need to quantify human complexity at first. Another important premise is that there is a need for an holistic strategy involving comprehensive, patient-centered, integrated care. Thus, our research question is, how does the approach to healthcare should change? Our interpretative approach is based on several key assumptions. First, the assumptions comes from system thinking and are the following. Systems are dynamic, complex, and interdependent. The systems comprise service providers and service clients working together to co-produce value in complex value chains or networks. Then we may say that organizations have far less inner complexity than their environment. And another important assumption is that all living systems are composed of a series of subsystems, each having self-organizing and self-regulatory characteristics. Second, the system medicine key assumption is that the single individual has got the maximum, represents the maximum complexity. And this is really important while we go toward a patient-centered healthcare model. Third, we consider the viable system approach structure system interpretative scheme. Here we shift from the parts to the whole and from a static to a dynamic view. The structure system approach says that a phenomenon can be observed from two different perspectives. The first one is by focusing on how it is made. So we have the structure-based view. The second one perspective is focused on how it works. So we have a system-based view. So the focus for us is on comparing the hospital and community home care service in terms of the effectiveness, the efficiency, the safety, and the sustainability of the healthcare service. The question is that, is integrated home care expected to be more or less complex to manage than hospital care? To refer to some shared evidence, we analyzed the COVID-19 pandemic and the regional healthcare management approaches in Italy to answer this question. The main approaches existent in Italy are the patient hospital-centered, which use the network of public and private facilities, the community-based that relies on public health network and local integration services, and the mixed one. The benchmark cases we analyze are the Lombardy case and the Veneto case. What happened during the first weeks of the pandemics? During the first weeks of the pandemics, there weren't a uniform pattern. And because of the regionally based Italian national healthcare system, each region developed a different approach. These approaches were defined by key differentiation factors, which were the structure of the regional healthcare system, the availability of resources, and the availability of facilities and healthcare professionals. What happened in Lombardy? In Lombardy, there were a patient-centered approach, relying on primary care and physician and hospital care. So there was a promotion of hospital-based assistance for critical cases. Because of the promotion of hospitalization, there were a saturation of beds and human resources, which led to the reduction in the quality of care. This saturation of beds led also to the failure of the initial effort to separate COVID-19 facilities from non-COVID facilities. In Veneto, there were a community-based diagnosis and care approach, and the key action were the identification of facilities only for COVID cases and facility for non-COVID cases, the protocols for general practitioners and the strong and more relevant role for general practitioners, and the enhancement of non-in-person activities, also with, for example, mobile diagnostic teams. Making a comparison between these two methods, these two models, in an early stage, we may see that in the Lombardy region, there was a less effective healthcare at the collective level. The model was less efficient in the management of resources, higher risky and less sustainable. In the Veneto region, in which we had the community center approach, this approach proved to be more effective with a higher level of care quality, more efficient in terms of resources and costs, less risky and more sustainable. Indeed, we may say that Western healthcare systems have been built around the concept of patient-centered care, but an epidemic requires a change of perspective toward the concept of community-centered care. Wearing now the viable system approach lens, we define our interpretative framework, also thanks to this empiric first stage of analysis. The criteria we used in our work would be the effectiveness, efficiency, and sustainability of the healthcare services. The lens can benefit from integration of key axioms and assumptions and principles of viable system approach, service dominant logic, and systems thinking. The framework can be the structural perspective, the systemic perspective, and the ecosystemic one. In this way, we may be able to investigate which model, hospital center one or community and home center one, proves to be more effective, efficient, and sustainable, and which one proved to be less complex to manage, given the context condition of the viable system approach. In the light of our framework, we outline some first interpretative hypotheses. What happened? In the hospital, the structural physical aspects of the service appear dominant compared to the systemic one. On the other hand, in the community and home care, the systemic dynamic aspects of service appear dominant compared to the structural ones. This happened because in hospitals, the physical structure are more visible to the observer. So the focus is on the internal structure. In home care, it is more difficult to see the system's structure, and the focus so is on the extended one. Indeed, in hospital care, we have an internal integration of the resources, while in home care, the resources are integrated in context. So we have a service ecosystems. Another difference is the involvement of social components and the involvement of patient families, which is limited in the first case and which is very high in the case of community and home care. Another very important thing emerged by the comparison is that in the hospital care, because of functions, roles, control mechanism, and responsibility more formally defined, we have more rigid protocols. On the other hand, in community care, the function, roles, and mechanism and responsibility are less formally defined, so there is a less rigid protocols. But what does this mean? The more rigid protocols of home care means traditional methods to manage the service. So the management of variety in hospitals care appears less complex. On the other hand, because of a less rigid protocol in community and home care, the management of variety appears more complex because there is a need to govern, there is a need for the governance of complex adaptive systems. So, summarizing in this view, clearly home care shows some characteristics of higher complexities, so the need to go to manage a higher complexity, and so a huge potential. Summarizing again in the perspective of the effectiveness, efficiency, safety, and sustainability of the service, we can say that there is a huge transformation between the pre-COVID-19 and the post-COVID-19 era. These differences highlights a huge potential which is not already developed for the community and home care. Indeed, shifting from hospital to community and home care may be positive in terms of effectiveness, in exemplum involving further dimension of satisfaction, in terms of efficiency, relying on and enrich the set of resources, safety using technology, sustainability, decongestioning hospitals. But how to manage the higher complexity of community home care so to exploit its potential? A further system thinking assumption about complexity help us here to recognize that things seem complex if we don't have a simple way to describe them. There may be a simple underlying rule for anything, even though the thing itself is complex. This means that the complexity, as you can read, is not in the observed object, but it is in the observer eyes. And this is what the viable system approach aims to do. It aims to provide simple scheme to frame complex problem, such as in this case, community and home care. So viable system approach indicates the key aspects for managing key issues in the management of variety, such as avoiding the silos effect. Actually, in community and home care, we have to integrate and manage many different verticalities, such as many systems, many disciplines, and many professionals. To avoid the silos effect, the viable system approach proposes the reference to the T-shaped model. The key idea of this model is the T-shaped people. T-shaped people are deep problem solvers in their home discipline, but also capable of interacting with an understanding specialists from a wide range of disciplines and functional areas. In the viable system approach, the key for building this T is developing the horizontal bar, that is endowing knowledge with more general schemes, using which it's possible to approach different disciplines, different systems, and different contexts. So the viable system approach indicates that the way to build this horizontal bar is adopting the system thinking general schemes. So to conclude our presentation, we underline the necessity to avoid the silos effect while integrating multiple disciplines, different healthcare disciplines, specialties, and professionals. To do so, boundary crossing capabilities are necessary. These boundary crossing capabilities are provided to us by system thinking. Thanks for your attention, and I don't know if there is any question or if you need some explanation or comments. Thank you. Professor, I'm not able to hear you.
I was saying that we can wait as planned at the end of the section. We have some spare time to use for foster discussion. So thank you for your presentation, and I think we can pass to the second one, but I am not sure to see the presenter. So it should be Ekaterina Gnatic. I called her before. Francesco, can you reach information? Probably could be that
yeah,
I has informed the organization that because I cannot see her in other sections, so maybe there is a problem with the possible presentation, although there are some Russian written names, so I cannot be sure.
Okay, I will try to 1 second to speak with Igor.
Is there any? Professor Vyacheslav Moiseev?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay. So it was I saw the Russian version of your name. I made an hypothesis about the possibility.
But I have some problems with camera. I don't know what happened, but I can't to do with it.
Because if you agree, we can give the word to you for your presentation. Are you anyway able to share or are you using a presentation for your speech?
Yes, I try now.
Okay, let's try so we can. In the meantime, we can have information from Ekaterina Gnatic, who is not joining us. So just to check emails. So if you agree to start now your presentation, Professor Moiseev?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Thank you. Do you see my screen?
Yes,
presentation?
it's arriving to us. Just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
It normally requires some time to be shared by all. Francesco, are you seeing anything different from me now? No. So we should wait because the system is telling us that you started to share your screen.
Perhaps the better
In the
solution.
meantime, may I ask you, Professor Moiseev, to introduce yourself, so to have the possibility to get you after also the Congress and to know what are you interested in. I know you are, so yeah, please.
Thank you, but do you see my presentation?
No.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Are you avoiding to put the presentation? Because if you just share your screen is better than having the presentation, because sharing the presentation mode requires more time. Usually it's easier when you just share the screen, your laptop, your computer screen.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you want, I can also write to you my email address in the chat. You will send to me the file and I will try to upload it for you, Professor, if you prefer. And usually I will change the slide according to your feedback.
Yes, thank you. And now I can simply read my presentation.
You don't want to try to send it to Francesco, so we will try to share for you.
Francesco.
Yeah. I wrote my email address in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
So it is Francesco. So probably reading Italian is not really useful for you.
Yes,
So just cutting your address. Can you read it in the chat?
Yes, I understand. Just a minute.
Yeah. We have time. In this session tomorrow, the advantage is that we have time. Today. Just to know, did you send the email, Professor Moisier?
Yes, I did it. I
Okay.
sent.
Okay, probably it may be big enough to use other time for this today's session. Not arriving yet, Francesco, right?
Not yet.
Not yet. Maybe there is a problem. Is it full of photos or something like that?
No, only pictures and text.
So pictures maybe can be. If you, anyway, while waiting for receiving your presentation via email, can you please introduce yourself, given that we cannot see your face and we do it to problem with the camera?
I work in Moscow Medical Dental University. I'm a chair of the chair of philosophy and human sciences, and my interests are in the philosophy of biology, of medicine, and so on. And cybernetic is one of the important themes interesting for me, and one of the my task, my interest in the investigations is Russian philosophy of old unity by Vladimir Solovyov.
Interesting. Really interesting. In fact, the title of your presentation, I can anticipate, is Polar Analysis as a Self-Reference Language for the Third Order Cybernetics. So it's a very challenging presentation. I saw the, should be, because I saw the abstract, and really interesting, of course, but it would be helped by the pictures and the video support of presentation. Anyway, any news, Francesco, about the file? There is another way to share the file on the the platform.
No.
Maybe there is a problem with the file.
Yeah, perhaps we can try to share the file through the chat. If
is it possible to attach the file to the
chat?
It's
a no, move the file from the desktop to the chat and send it. Unfortunately, we had not the presentation in the share.
Not really easy to do anyway. what about Professor Moisiev? What did you prefer to do? Would you like to start presenting your work, or you prefer to wait for sharing the presentation? And about Gnatic,
we are
Francesco?
trying to contact her.
Okay. She was in fact not connected to,
no.
to any of the sessions, so no mistakes about this. But there must be a problem.
We have wrote an email, but for now we have not received a reply. So perhaps she has some kind of technical problem.
You contact. Yes. What about you? You asked Igor also if he received. Okay. So maybe there is there must be obviously a technical problem. So Professor Moisiev, what do you prefer to do? If you think to need your presentation for your speech, or we can try to insert it in the afternoon session, because there is also this chance. So we can use the spare time of the afternoon part of the section to insert your presentation, if you also prefer to have a wider audience for your speech. Because I see they are all attracted by the other very important sessions so far. So an idea could be.
Perhaps, I'm sorry, Professor. Perhaps I have just received something. I won't try to.
Okay.
To download it and see if it works. Only one second.
Anyway, the proposal could be live. Professor Moisiev, do you prefer to present now, given that Francesco will receive and regularly open? You prefer to present now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just another minute for Francesco trying to download. It was a big file for probably, right?
Yeah, it's dependent by the animation effect. Okay, so now it should work.
Do you see? Great.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francesco. So we're ready to listen to your intriguing presentation.
Can I record my report too?
Francesco is recording ready because only for internal use. So if you want after the Congress to receive the recording of your presentation, it will be possible.
Yes.
So you don't need now to record. If you look at the display, you can see the recording light, red light.
Yes, I see. Thank you. Dear colleagues, and thank you very much for this possibility. My report is named by Polar Analysis as a self-reference language on the third order cybernetics. The next slide, please. And the third order cybernetics, including subjective reality, needs an integral self-referential language by means of which it would be possible to express both object and subject structures in a relevant way. The next slide, please. I offer a version of one such language, the so-called polar analysis, which assumes a mathematical explication and generalization of the ideas of German classical dialectic. One of the main tasks of polar analysis is to build a polar portrait on the system X. That is to map the system X on a polarity P in a system of basic polarities P1, Pn, as well as to simulate the system dynamics as an evolution of the polarity. The next, please. According to German dialectics, being is based on different kinds of polarities, contrasting determinations that have both the moment of incompatibility and complementarity with each other. A classic example is the polarities of thesis and antithesis, which must find their highest unity in synthesis. The next, please. For example, polarities have different levels, and thesis and antithesis combines in synthesis of the third order, and then this synthesis becomes thesis of the second order, and so on. And the next, please. I propose to use vector analysis constructs for the mathematical expression of such a structure, interpreting thesis and antithesis as two orthogonal vectors T and A in some vector space, when synthesis can be represented as a vector sum, S equals T plus A. More generally, there can be more than two theses, which can be expressed by the basic polar orthogonal vectors P1, Pn, the synthesis of which will be their vector sum S equals P plus P1 plus Pn. If the vector space contains the scalar product, then metric structures on the vectors can be introduced. So on this picture, we can say this vector interpretation of basic polarities. In the simplest way, these two polarities, thesis and antithesis, and each of them we can represent it as orthogonal vectors, T and A, T for thesis and A for antithesis, and synthesis is a sum, vector sum of these vectors, S equals T plus A. The next, please. Main task of the polar analysis is construction of polar portraits on these systems, different systems. Polar portrait in the case of vector interpretation of polarities is simply a vector, polar vector P, which constructed in the basis of basic polarities. In the simplest situation, when we have only two orthogonal polarities, two orthogonal vectors in the plane, two-dimensional plane VP is a interferation of vectors T and A, is some mix of them. The next, please. In particular, we can introduce the measure of synthesis, MP, of a particular polar vector P as the projection of vector P on the synthesis on synthetic vector S. MP is a scalar product P on S little s, where little s equals big S divided by model S, and little s is odd of the vector S, big S. We can formulate the law of development in the form dmp divides dt more or less 0, where dmp is differential of mp and dt is differential of time. This is mathematical formula of law of monotonic growth of the measurement of synthesis mp of the vector p until the maximum of this measure is reached in a given polar system. Like the second law of thermodynamics, the law of development is also defined on polarities, but has a different content than the tendency for uniformity. The measure of synthesis MP can also be called a measure of development. Next, please. On this picture, we can see the measure of synthesis as a vector projection of vector P, polar vector portrait of system, on synthetic vector S. It is simply vector projection. This measure, it is maybe a degree of synthesis in a vector P. Next, please. And using this model, we can illustrate law of development as transformation during the time vector P when he more and more closer to vector S, synthetic vector, such that vector projection of this vector is more and more. Next, please. And two little examples about the application of this vector interpretation of polar analysis. First example is from this theory of autopoiesis by Maturana and Varela. As known, development as the growth of the volume of invariance is used in the theory of autopoiesis. Polar portrait of volume invariance concludes two important features. First, the parameters of the environment is basic polarities. We can interpret the parameters of the environment as basic polarities in some polar space. And second, the state of the organism which preserves the pattern under these conditions, we can interpret as synthetic polar vector. Next, please. We can see here this interpretation. For example, temperature invariance, volume of invariance for organism is all the temperatures during which organism can conserve internal temperature as constant. And here on the Tx are different values of external temperature, and T in we can see temperature, internal temperature, temperature of the internal environment of the organism. And temperature invariance is all the external temperatures under which organism conserve a constant internal temperature. If we imagine discrete values of external temperatures, then this discrete value we can represent as basic polar vector in some many dimensional vector space. And then volume of invariance is a synthetic vector in this case. For example, here we can see three value of temperature, and vectors P1, P2, and P3 are in accordance with these three values. And synthetic vector is equals sum P1 plus P2 plus P3. And if we calculate the value of this vector S using Euclid matrix, then we can the value you can see this lower in the picture, and we can say that this value is more when we have more basic polarities, and it is with accordance of the value of invariance of the organism. So we can interpret value of invariance in the terms of polar analysis. More value of invariance is more synthetic vector with more measure on this vector. The next, please. And one more example is emergence of multicellularity as a case of development. For example, many cells is emerged from one cell, and every cell we can interpret as polar vector, basic polar vector. In the case of one cell, one basic polar vector P1 is simultaneously synthetic vector, but in the case of multicellularity, every cell is a basic vector, and synthetic vector is different from these all basic vectors, and its sum, its value more than the value of every basic vector. So we have here also increasing of measure of synthetic vector. Next, please. And what about application to third-order cybernetics of this approach? Numerous examples of the application of the polar analysis are in many of my works, from the structures, for example, of external world, structures of atoms, biosystems, and so on, to the examples of internal worlds, different states of internal worlds, for example, falsification of the theory by counterexample, the dynamics of the process of understanding, etc. In the application to the third order cybernetics, the problem of regulation of development can be formulated by means of polar analysis. Oh, sorry, a previous slide. Yes, thank you. When the subject of regulation evaluates the polar portraits of himself and his environment and seeks to maximize the measure of synthesis of a complex system, including encountering queries, counterexamples in relation to his hypothesis and integrating them into more complete synthetic structures. Next, please. Of course, it should be borne in mind that the polar portrait of a system is only one of the possible representations of a structure, and it cannot express the fullness of its definitions. But the part of these definitions that can play an important role in the structure and evolution of the system. And in the next, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you also for this final, very fascinating slide. Of course, your presentation, the subject of your presentation, actually, I take this opportunity of time to make a question, but probably we can have discussion as planned in the afternoon. Just a curiosity, because we started also in our presentation with Claudia, just to give an answer to the session call about the necessity to integrate knowledge, to make it easier for vertical, what we call vertical knowledge, because I don't know if you followed the presentation, but it was the problem of what we call the T-shaped knowledge, that is the kind of knowledge that can create some boundary crossing communication, interaction, dialogue, and co-creation of knowledge by not simply combining vertical knowledge. So in the kind of work you presented, of course, they require some more vertical preparation. Do you think that also trying to leverage the philosophical foundations of your view and your research, your work, is there the chance to abstract some knowledge to make it available to a wider audience of system thinkers, also young ones, trying to benefit from the proposal of the language you you presented.
Is it a question to me? Yes.
Sorry?
Is it a question to me or to all our participants?
No, it was for you. If you
For me?
if you have some word to say.
Yes, of course. I think that we need very much general language of systemic approach, and we have not logic of whole. There were many approaches, many theories to express this logic, but we have many problems and now with this, and we need some universal, general, structural approach to express these properties of the whole, different levels of organization, procedure of synthesis and analysis, and so on. And polar analysis is one possible effort to construct not only a full language, of course, but maybe some interesting aspects of this language. And I hope that we can applicate it in different regions, in biology, in medicine, in physics, in our thinking, and so on. It is only one effort, but I think it is interesting because we can not only quality approach here, but we can use quantitative properties and some quantity, some measure of synthesis, with the help of which we can express law of development as growth of synthetical aspects in evolutionary system, and so on. But yes, I hope it is interesting.
Thank you for your reply, and it's clarifying the point. And yes, it's one of the proposal, and we hope that this contest could be the one, the better one, the best one for trying to engage other scholars to this field. So I think we can conclude this first part of the session now, and we will go on in the second part in the afternoon, so we can meet again at the end for fostering some further discussion. So thank you very much, Professor Wojciech, for your presentation, and thank you also to the participants. See you
Thank you.
in a few minutes.